I just want to set the table very quickly because a lot has happened since last Friday's meeting in the Oval Office with JD Vance, Donald Trump, and President Zelensky of Ukraine. And before we talk about the aftermath, I haven't talked to you, Ed, about your reaction to that meeting. What was it as you watched it unfold?
Visceral, actually, because watching in any sort of context in life, bullies gang up on the weak person and take visual pleasure in ganging up and inflicting pain, humiliation. It was a visceral reaction that I had. It was a sort of gut punch because it was a moment that told you more starkly than anything else in the last few weeks, and there have been many moments, but it told you more starkly than anything else that the world has changed.
In fact, European Union Foreign Policy Chief Koya Kallas, I hope I'm saying the name correctly, said on Friday, quote, "Today it became clear that the free world needs a new leader. It's up to us, Europeans, to take this challenge." You told me how you felt, and I'd love to hear you. I'm sure you have contacts all over Europe. Tell us how European leaders and officials reacted and what you heard from some of them.
So it's been a rolling reaction that really began on Valentine's Day when JD Vance gave that speech in Munich. And this was a couple of weeks later.
That was at the Munich Security Council, and I think you and I talked about that. Will you remind people, because not everyone's a foreign policy expert like you are, what he said and the reaction to what he said there?
So this is the annual security conference they hold in Munich. Usually the vice president goes. Kamala Harris went 4 times. Vance, first time as vice president. Of course, it's on German soil. And it's 3 days before the German election, a very, very important German election. Vance doesn't give a security speech, even though that's the forum. He gives a speech saying the threat to Europe doesn't come from Putin. It doesn't come from the outside world. It comes from you, liberal democracies, from within, and from your drawing a line, your quarantining of the far right, including the AfD, the German far right. You should not censor these people. You should not be scared of freedom of speech. So he, on German soil, in Munich, if you think of the historic analogies of Munich, basically gave a boost to the neo-Nazi party. And I think for Germany, for Europe in general, but for Germany in particular, this was an absolutely unimaginable moment. And it caused a sort of conversion, a road to Damascus of the incoming German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, the new leader of Germany, who said we must find our independence from the United States.
The far right party did not win the election, but they did sort of disturbingly well, right?
They did. They got 1/5 of the vote, which is more than double what they've ever got before. They didn't get anywhere close to what people like Elon Musk and clearly JD Vance wanted them to get. And if you'll remember, Elon Musk addressed an AfD rally from a giant screen,
right,
looking like it was from an Orwell, a Big Brother movie, urging the AfD crowd as Germans to stop feeling guilty for their past. So, you know, there have been a lot of these kinds of moments, but I think the real sort of sobering realization in Europe that the world has changed began that day with JD Vance's speech, which was an act of unprecedented provocation.
When you think about it, when you're writing your columns, Edward, what do you know, and try to make sense of this complete about face of U.S. foreign policy, how do you explain it to your readers or even to yourself? I've read so many pieces speculating on why Donald Trump has decided to embrace Vladimir Putin so wholeheartedly. You know, there were indications that this was happening, but why do you think this has taken place?
Well, so it's a very good question. And I mean, we could speculate about the compromat, so-called compromat, that the Russians, some believe the Russians have on Trump. I have nothing, I have no information, new information to add. I would, though, note that his affinity for Putin goes back to the 2016 campaign, where he invited Putin live from the stage in July of that year to hack into the DNC servers and Hillary's emails and help him. And that's what happened. And indeed, the Mueller report, detailed how that happened. Mueller didn't recommend prosecution, but he did lay out 10 examples in a 448-page document that happened. It since became known as the Russia hoax. It was not a hoax. There was a bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee report that went even further than the Mueller report. So we should remember this has a long history. Trump's admiration for Putin.
The Russian hoax by right-wing media, and I think explained away. One piece in The Atlantic talked about how Donald Trump feels like he and Vladimir Putin have both been victimized by these investigations and these charges, and that somehow he feels like a kindred spirit while simultaneously respecting and admiring his strongman standing. So who knows, right?
Who knows? I mean, you're right to mention that, which he then went on about in the Oval Office last Friday, having referenced the fact that Zelensky, before this war began, when Trump was still president first time round, had caused him political problems. Now, that, of course, was Trump's first impeachment, because Trump was, as that transcript, famous, notorious transcript showed, said to Zelensky, that implied, we're not going to deliver you the weapons that Congress has authorized and appropriated unless you help me bring Biden down, my likely candidate, through investigations of Hunter Biden. So, there is a long history, and that movie plays in Trump's head. So we look at battlefields, we look at Russia's imperial ambitions to reconstitute the Soviet Union, we look at the relations amongst NATO members and so on. But Trump has a separate movie running in his head, and it's a very personal, domestic, political movie about how Zelensky is essentially with the Democrats and Putin is with us Republicans.
Were you surprised when it was announced that the U.S. is temporarily suspending aid to Ukraine?
Not remotely surprised. They've been, ever since Trump's inauguration on January the 20th, they've been slow walking the aid that had been passed last year. Biden had hurried up a lot of deliveries in his last few weeks as president in anticipation that Trump would probably pull the plug or at least slow down. So I am not surprised, unfortunately, at all. It is a moment of truth, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe, because Europe now has to step in.
And will Europe step in and make up the deficit that will occur if the U.S. no longer provides aid to Ukraine?
I think it can financially. I mean, remember, if Europe plus the EU plus the UK, my country, has a GDP 12 times the size of Russia. So it's not as if there's a lack of money there. I think until very recently there was a lack of will, but I'm increasingly persuaded, including today, that the Germans, who are the laggards, the real laggards there, are going to step up. And Friedrich Merz today said we're going to basically scrap what's called the debt break, which is an historic German rule that stops you from borrowing more than a tiny share of GDP. It's a very fiscally sort of straitjacket rule. We're going to just get rid of that for defense, and we're going to spend hundreds of billions. Friedrich Merz seems to, unlikely character, but he seems to be auditioning if you like, with a sort of another historic irony as a German leader for the Winston Churchill role here.
Interesting. But let's talk about sort of what Zelensky is now signaling. Right? He now kind of is, you can help me understand this, but it seems like he's signaling a willingness to re-engage with the United States, to hand over the mineral rights, um, and to kind of meet again and saying that everyone wants peace. So can you help me and everyone else understand what Zelensky's play is here? Because as you said, if the Europeans can pick up the slack, if the US stops providing aid to Ukraine, why is he kind of genuflecting, if you will, it seems, to Donald Trump after he was so badly treated on Friday?
So you're absolutely right. The Europeans can step in some of the areas where American military supplies have been forthcoming, but not all of them. Um, the existing US supplies in Ukraine probably run out by summer. So Europe's got maybe 3-4 months. But there are certain things that Europe can't replace, such as Starlink, Elon Musk's Starlink, which is crucial to the very successful Ukrainian drone campaign that has caused enormous Russian casualties and pretty much halted their ability to advance. They need those satellites to be able to identify targets in these sort of swarms of drones that the Ukrainians are manufacturing. And Elon Musk, let us not forget, is also a part of this equation. He's already once, a couple of years ago, threatened to turn off Starlink. And now he is tweeting or posting things like Zelensky is truly evil. I mean, I know he coins these kinds of posts once every 7 minutes, so they're devalued by overuse. But we have to consider what an extraordinary thing this is, that the richest guy in the world, the alter ego to the president, Donald Trump, has control, like a Bond villain, over the ability of Ukraine's defense industry, defense forces, military, to defend the country. And so if that's switched off, there is no European alternative. There will be 2-3 years from now, but there isn't now. So Zelensky has to, what I call, bring fruits to the volcano. He has to genuflect to Trump.
So how do you see this all playing out? Might Donald Trump actually get credit for being a hard ass to Zelensky and a deal being made somehow, and he gets applauded for being tough in the Oval Office? I mean, how do you see this shaking out?
Well, the ability of Trump and his sort of the Trumpian the MAGA ecosystem, to construct alternative narratives is never to be underestimated. So I guess that's how it would be presented. I mean, he's already got pretty much every single Republican on the Hill, barring Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, to say what they know is not true.
Which Ukraine started the war, and that Zelensky is the dictator, not Putin, and all kinds of other nonsense.
Indeed. Listen to Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham knows better. They're also, it should be really emphasized, because this is menacing, they are also describing Zelensky as dispensable. Trump himself said that yesterday. If he can't do a deal, we will find somebody else. We will find. It's up to us, not the Ukrainian people. Vance said that on Fox News last night. Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk on his X.
Why are they doing that?
This is an invitation for the Russians to assassinate Zelensky. Let's make no bones about this. This is an invitation to kill him. They have tried before. There were assassination squads, Russian ones, in Kyiv early in the war. But clearly the price of that was considered too high while Biden was still president. There's no longer a price attached to that. There would be no consequences, is what Trump and his people, at least how I interpret their words, and I suspect the Kremlin interprets their words, there would be no consequences to getting rid of this guy. This is the guy, in their eyes, who stands between us and peace. And who could be against peace?
That is absolutely chilling.
It is. And I think that's why this gut punch from last Friday has only got worse. Because Trump didn't say that in the Oval Office last Friday, but he's said that since then. And Musk, as I say, has amplified it. So it's now become casual, loose, but also very, very deliberate talk.
Is there no turning back when it comes to this new forged relationship with the United States and Russia? Can you see this morphine, or can you see Donald Trump backtracking on any of this stuff? Or is this the new world order, for lack of a better term?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think a lot of the answer to your question depends on just how quickly and impressively the Europeans step up. Because if they can get, as part of this deal, where Zelensky signs away his mineral rights to Trump, if they can get 40 to 60,000 European troops, two or three divisions in Ukraine for peacekeeping, and they can do this at speed and show that this is, well, an impressive deal that we're going to enforce here. Trump would want possibly to be in on this impressive deal. That would be the incentive for him to provide what the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer calls an American backstop. Now, that wouldn't involve American boots on the ground in Ukraine, only European boots on the ground, but it might involve the continuation of what they call ISR, which is intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and targeting, and some air support. So it really depends to a large degree, I think, on what the Europeans can sell through their actions and through their sense of urgency.
What's in it for Putin? I mean, what is he being promised if the war ends? Is he going to get land in exchange for a ceasefire? I mean, how are they convincing him that the war must stop and there's something for him to gain if it does?
Well, Trump is already talking about lifting sanctions on Russia, which has been harmful to its economy, and at least easing sanctions. You know, if you get a bad version of this deal where the Europeans can't really get a significant peacekeeping presence in Ukraine, let's say 10, 20,000, which the Russians could pick off, then there's going to be a collapse in Ukrainian morale. Then you're going to get people deserting the front line. The fact that America has abandoned them has already been a big blow to morale there in the field, in the battlefield. You will get people leaving Ukraine, and you could get a crumbling. So it could fall into Putin's lap. That's what Putin's hoping for.
And he's hoping after that, what?
Well, you know, I think one of the European leaders, I think it was Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, said, we must turn Ukraine into a steel porcupine, something that's indigestible to the Russians. Now, I suspect if they managed suddenly to break through these very still, mostly unmoving battle lines, and get more of Ukraine, what they will have is, be careful what you wish for, you might actually get it, is an insurgency they'll never be able to suppress. Lots of butchers, which, if you remember, was where there was some really particularly horrendous Russian gang rapes, human rights violations early in the war, and a complete sort of nightmare for Russia, and running cost without end. So I don't see how that ends particularly happily for him either.
And what about the potential for Russian aggression elsewhere in Europe if Ukraine falls? That, of course, is a huge concern for countries like Poland, is it not?
A concern. I mean, the Poles, the Baltic nations, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Moldova, which isn't a part of NATO, might be an easier target because it isn't part of NATO. But even in that scenario I described with European peacekeeping troops in Ukraine, but not of the scale that appeals to Trump, not of the scale where Trump wants to provide a backstop, then you've got the perfect test there for Putin, is he targets those NATO troops. And does America come to their aid? And if he doesn't, well, NATO is well and truly dead. So it's hard to game out how this is exactly going to go. But I know this, that if the Europeans step up, because they've been complacent for many decades. I mean, that's an entirely fair point. It's not just Trump who's made that. It's Obama who made it. It's Biden who made it. It's been a consistent line of US presidents, Democratic or Republican, that they haven't shouldered enough of the burden. So if Europe does step up, then it could change the game. And suddenly Europe's in the driving seat. If it only sort of partially does, I suspect Putin will just see low-hanging fruit and he will go for it.
I wanted to ask you really quickly before you leave, because you're so smart and people really have enjoyed our conversations before. I wanted to ask you about the stock market, Ed, if I could. It kept plunging today following news that the 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico went into effect, in addition to doubling the import tax on Chinese goods to 20%. On top of yesterday's losses, the S&P 50, Dow, and NASDAQ were all down. The S&P 500 is now dropped below its election day level, erasing any Trump-related gains. What are your concerns about a global economic slowdown?
Major, and I think it's already beginning. I mean, remember, Canada, Mexico, and China are America's three largest trading partners. Now, Canada and Mexico are its two largest. And the American auto sector is utterly integrated with these North American NAFTA, formerly NAFTA partners. So this is a trade war on America's auto sector. It's a trade war in terms of China's retaliation on America's farm sector. It's a trade war on American prices. Trump promised to reduce prices, not inflation, actual prices. We're going to see inflation picking up quite rapidly. And one thing I've never quite seen is at the Atlanta Fed yesterday said at current rate, the first quarter of 2025, we're going to see an annualized shrinkage of GDP of, I think it was 2.8%. I forget the exact decimal point. They had been forecasting just 2 months earlier a 2-point-something% expansion. I've never seen sentiment and projections, particularly by a central bank, who are very cautious people, swing so violently from growth to contraction. So we're seeing the real more rapidly than anybody could have imagined, Trumpian economic chickens coming home to roost quite quickly.
Having said that, Howard Lutnick, as I'm sure you know, the Secretary of Commerce, suggested on Fox News that a deal with North American allies could be announced as soon as tomorrow. Do you think that's likely, or is it bluster?
Anything is possible. I mean, because this is even more harmful to Canadians and Mexicans than it is to American consumers. So, I mean, they would, of course, like an exit ramp. And Trump, of course, likes to trumpet deals. So if you can claim, look, I threatened them and they caved, might not be true, but if you can somehow present it that way, then nothing would surprise me.
Before we go, I wanted to, how upset or worried do you think President Trump is with this stock market performance? Because he's normally associated what the market is doing with his level of success.
Yeah, he's obsessed with the stock market. I think if this turned into a bear market, which we'd have to see over a period of weeks, this might be the kind of thing that would help him to change his mind. I mean, appeals to ethics or well-being or allies and stability, those will fall on deaf ears. But if he sees the Dow and the Nasdaq going down the toilet, he'll listen to that.
He'll pay attention. And finally, my social media followers basically all ask, in essence, can America recover from this? Have world leaders besides Putin lost all trust in Trump? And what does this mean for U.S. relations with other countries moving forward? In essence, what does all of what has transpired do to our global standing?
So doing deals with Trump, this Azmaka, as they called the renegotiated NAFTA, was done by Trump. Trump proclaimed it in his first term as a great renegotiation of NAFTA. Now he's saying, who would have signed that deal? It's bad for America. This is the deal that Trump himself signed and negotiated. So appetite to do deals with a Trump-led America is going to be extremely limited. One sort of consequence of this is Europe's going to be moving closer to China. This is surely not in America's national interest. And it will take some time to repair. It will take a long time to repair.
Well, Ed Luce of the Financial Times. Ed, thank you so much for spending some time with me this afternoon. I'm sure our viewers appreciate your insight, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Always a delight, Katie, and I'm glad my daughter was around. Otherwise,
yeah, I was going to say, please thank your daughter and tell her maybe she's going to have to move in if we do this Instagram live situation again. Ed, thank you, and thanks everyone for watching. Take care.